The Hawaiʻi State Legislature started its 2021 session uncertain how it would fund anything given the dire predictions of a $1.4 billion budget shortfall. But the situation changed with an influx of federal dollars and a better economic outlook as tourism reopened. Lawmakers debated issues like raising the minimum wage, legalizing recreational marijuana, and the future of Aloha Stadium, the positives and negatives. Tonight's live broadcast and live stream of insights on PBS Hawaii start now.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Daryl Huff. The 2021 state legislative session wrapped up a week ago. It began with a grim outlook because of the economic fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic, but a huge boost in federal aid helped weather the financial storm. With the money, the state avoided teacher and public worker furloughs and layoffs and protected funding for critical social services. But during this unprecedented time, did lawmakers do enough to make Hawaii better? We'll ask our panel tonight. We look forward to your participation in tonight's show. You can email, call, or tweet your questions, and you'll find a live stream of this program at pbshawaii.org and the PBS Hawaii Facebook page. Now to our guests. Democratic Senator Ron Kochi has been serving Kauai and Niihau since 2010. He's been Senate President for 5 years. Prior to this time at the legislature, Kochi was elected to the Kauai County Council 11 times, serving 22 years. Democrat Scott Saiki was first elected to the State House of Representatives in 1994. The current Speaker of the House serves areas of Macaulay, Kaheka, Kaka'ako, and downtown. This year, he was also the chair of the House COVID-19 Committee. Chad Blair is the Politics and Opinion Editor for Honolulu Civil Beat. In his role, he covers how political and policy decisions impact the people of Hawaii. And Colin Moore is the director of the Public Policy Center and associate professor of political science at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Let's start off with that first question that was in the setup here. You know, what happened this year? What did you guys do this year that actually made Hawaii better? We know there was a very reactive session, you know, in terms of waiting to find out what the feds were doing and so on. But, you know, Senator Kochi and Representative Saiki, please give us an idea. What do you think you passed that's going to have the most positive impact on the state? I'll let you start, Senator.
Well, I think the most positive thing that we could do is ensure that we did have a balanced budget. And well, much is said about, the legislators working hard to protect the jobs of union members who vote for us. When we're trying to rebuild the economy, when we're trying to get the different programs done, if we don't have employees showing up to work, we're not able to process permits. One of the big obstacles we faced coming out of the last big recession and having furlough days is having permits backing up and not getting things going through the pipeline so that when businesses were ready to go, we couldn't get them started. When you furlough across the board and people who are in the Department of Taxation who go to work and the work they do, the work they perform generates revenue for the state and they're at home 2 days a month, then those are 2 days a month that we're not getting the revenue pushed through the pipeline and getting out to the people when people want their unemployment insurance claims processed correctly and getting our food stamp or SNAP program distributed. You need the employees there to perform the work. And so that was of great significance. The second thing that we haven't completed yet, but I believe that we're fundamentally going to change the way that we deliver public education in the state. There's no way around it. And the advances in technology and some of the improvements we've already put to broadband upgrades what we can deliver in K through 12, what we can deliver in higher education Telemedicine has advanced maybe 5 years or more.
Hey, Senator, let me interrupt you because I want to give Representative Saiki a chance to talk, and I want to circle back to those issues in more detail later on. But Speaker Saiki, what would you say is something positive? We know we all dodged a bullet, or you folks dodged a bullet with the help of the feds, but what about something positive? What's going to change for the better in the state of Hawaii because of something you guys did?
Well, I think, related to what the Senate President just mentioned in stabilizing the budget, we made efforts to provide direct financial relief to those who are in need, to bolster up the safety net. And we did that even though funds were short. We provided $80 million directly for those who need general assistance, food stamps, homeless services, sex abuse treatment services, kupuna care. So that was one of our top priorities, was to restore the safety net, even during this time when we actually had to cut our overall state budget by 8% this year. But we did prioritize the safety net. We also provided funding for the unemployment office. We have an appropriation for about $100 million over the next 2 years. We have asked them to use that funding to hire more staff because we want them to provide in-person services for those who are unemployed. As you know, our unemployment rate is still the highest in the nation, and we need to help more people with their claims.
Chad Blair from Civil Beat, what do you, I don't necessarily need you to come up with a positive thing, that's kind of their job, but what is your impression of what happened with this legislature this year? Did you see anything done that's going to be fundamentally changing life in Hawaii?
No, I don't think you can overstate just how serious of a situation it looked like we were in just 4 months ago. When the governor delivered his budget back in December, it looked very grim. He was saying something about $1.4 billion in each of the next 4 fiscal years. And then somewhere along the way in March, you saw the ARP, the American Rescue Plan, come in. And as Speaker Saiki said, you were able to restore these very important things. And that is important to the people of Hawaii. Sex Abuse Treatment Center, helping kupuna. I think another one was HIV prevention programs. You can't really overstate how important that it is. I don't know that the legislature could have done too much more given this very tight time frame. Remember, session was actually cut short a week. Remember as well, the whole Capitol was shut down to the public. Very difficult to do business. And I actually give the Senate President and the Speaker credit for managing to televise all those hearings. That was pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I was impressed. It was quite easy to kind of cover what was going on because, you just click on a YouTube link. It was pretty easy. Colin Moore from UH, what are your thoughts on that general subject matter? Do you feel like they did a good job?
Well, look, I want to mention some things that haven't been mentioned, some bills that I think are actually quite important. We can get to some criticism later, but I want to give the legislature credit for doing things like reforming payday loans, passing automatic voter registration. That's a bill that's been kicking around for years. Some really interesting, innovative things like allowing perhaps a dynamic pricing system for trails and parks. I think this really could be a great way to reform tourism in the future. This would sort of allow an Uber-like pricing system to control over tourism. The repeal of the sub-minimum wage, that's an obscure issue, but it's very important. And then a couple of sustainability issues. I want to give Representative Lowen credit for passing 2 bills that will make it easier to build basically the infrastructure to allow for more electric vehicles, to have the state convert over to electric vehicles. These are big things. It was a very challenging session. Obviously, trying to make sure that we plug these holes in the budget came first. And of course, there's certainly criticism about bills that weren't passed, but these are important substantive bills, and they were passed, as Chad mentioned, in a session that was shorter than normal.
Okay, so I'm starting to get viewer questions already, and so the first one was something people have mentioned already. Why was the minimum wage not increased to be in alignment with the cost of living increases? Representative Saiki, I believe the House got the blame for killing the minimum wage. Is that fair?
Yeah, we got the blame. But our chair of our labor committee, Representative Richard Onishi from the Big Island, did make a statement last week and the week before that he will do some hard work over this summer, not just on minimum wage, but on other issues that affect financial fairness. There are a lot of different ways to promote fairness for people in Hawaii. And as you recall, 2 years ago, right before the pandemic began, the House and the Senate had agreed on a package to not just increase the minimum wage, but to also extend some tax credits for those who are in need, including the earned income tax credit. And unfortunately, when the pandemic hit in February and March, we had to abandon that package. But I think what we'll see next year is another package along the lines of the one that we had introduced 2 years ago.
Senator Kochi, were you disappointed by the failure to pass that minimum wage? I think it did get out of the Senate, didn't it?
Yeah, we put a bill over, and some of those discussions could have been held if they had amended the bill and put forth some of the ideas the House had. I think the unfortunate circumstance was we never had a chance to try to talk through some of the ideas the House had, in conference, and see if there was a way to reconcile our differences. But Representative Onishi has laid out what he's going to do, and our commitment is to try to work with the House and see what we can get passed next year.
Right, and Darryl, just to be fair, the Senate bill that came over to the House proposed an increase of $1 from $1.90, so $10.10 to $12, and that would take effect on July 1st, 2022, so a year and 2 months from now. So it was a delayed minimum wage proposal.
And it was fairly modest too. It sounds like it wasn't
Yes, it
wasn't
was.
the $15 that people are talking about.
Well, it was less than the amount that we had proposed 2 years ago through our joint Senate House package.
Colin Moore. There seems to be a perception out there that the legislature, the administration took care of government workers, took care of businesses, but literally didn't do much for typical workers. Is that a fair evaluation, do you think?
Well, I don't know if I'd phrase it precisely that way. I mean, a lot of progressives were very disappointed about not passing the minimum wage, and it's true that the state is going to give small businesses a big break by using federal funds to replenish that unemployment insurance. My view to this is that the legislature took a fairly cautious approach to try to protect those small businesses. I think the House this session seemed a little more conservative to me than the Senate, and I suspect it was because those House members heard a lot from the small businesses in their district. Those are often the folks who give money around campaign time. They have a lot of contacts with their members. So, I do think the legislature made a decision to protect public employees and small businesses over, some of the more aggressive progressive packages that were proposed. But I also think that we're going to see those come back next legislative session because there is a lot of political support behind them. And we're going to be heading into an election year, and members like to list those wins on on the flyers they send around. So I don't think those issues are gone, but I know progressives are very disappointed, and in some cases they probably have a right to be so.
Chad Blair, what's your read on how the legislature did for lower priced workers, people who don't make that much money and may have been without work? I know they did fund unemployment, but most of that money was passed through from the federal government.
Yeah, but remember, Hawaii's employers would have been stuck with that price tag, $700 million for the unemployment insurance, had not the legislature been able to use that $700 million from the federal government. I would say a couple of things. It really would have been very difficult to ask a business that has been closed or has had to lay off people to say, look, you got to raise the minimum wage this year. That was a tough thing to be able to say to businesses. And the speaker is absolutely right. That was a joint package just a year and a half ago to raise it as high as $13, maybe $15 down the road. I give credit to Colin, by the way, for a shout out to the sub-minimum wage. That's where people that are disabled, that under the federal law don't have to be paid the minimum wage, dating back to a 1930s law that was passed. It's really in conflict with the American Disabilities Act. That was really a remarkable thing. That thing died over and over again. I'll say one other thing. Rep. Onishi, in particular, cited the Alice report. Very concerned about those folks that are really struggling to get by. and has said that, if you pass a minimum wage, there's going to be a ripple effect that's going to affect a lot of other people. You're going to have to raise not just, it's going to affect your wage, it's going to affect other government salaries. And so I think I take him at his word that they're in the interim, they're going to come back and try and help folks out. And yes, I think they did have the folks that were struggling the most in mind to get by to help them out this session.
Let me ask, I'm thinking about some of these big issues. I've got a lot of questions coming in quickly, and I'm going to get to those. But I'm curious as to what ended up being the final result of tax reform. Was there a break given to people who are low income? I know there was some talk about that at the beginning of the session. Again, when there was no money, a lot of that stuff went off the table. And was there any effort to tax, for example, the rich or the people who were fine through this pandemic? Senator Kochi, can you give me a sense of what changes were made to the tax system for people this year?
There were very few at the end, I think, with the federal money that came in, a lot of the more progressive ideas were put on the side. I think there's a great concern that we need to stimulate business, and by encouraging business to flourish, it in turn winds up, getting people back and working. And while you said there's a lot of federal money that passed through, the difficulty is trying to figure out how you balance where the federal money went and how do we use the money that we got to make sure that, we're doing a well-rounded assistance program. For those that were unemployed, they immediately got a $600 plus up every week by the federal government. For those, when that ran out, then it was a $300 plus up. We put in rental assistance programs to assist those who weren't able to make those rental payments. And we tried to create a program where the rental assistance went directly to the landlord. So the landlord who had to pay the mortgage wound up making out. We spent quite a bit of money to do feeding programs because there were just so many in the community in need who simply had to come out to the food drives we had. We made sure using federal money we could get the free lunches to any students that came through. So, I just wanted to circle back to what did we do for, the average people. There was a lot of things, like Speaker Saikian said, that we did, but there wasn't much that happened in Texas.
Let me, Speaker Saikian, there was an interesting thing that happened with the way the federal laws were written. And I recall it came up where, because they basically constrained you on how much tax relief you could offer, right? And how much, so you ended up actually not passing things you wanted to pass because you were afraid it might violate the federal mandates associated with all that aid money. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. When the Federal Rescue Act came down, it included a provision that our understanding was inserted into the federal legislation at the very last minute. And it basically prohibited states from reducing taxes and offsetting the cost of the tax through the federal rescue fund. So in other words, the federal government's position was that, why should we give you funds if you're going to just turn around and reduce your state taxes to benefit from that? So yeah, at that point when the Rescue Act came down, the legislature we had to basically cancel and put off all of our tax reduction bills at that point. But even then, we were able to raise some taxes. The conveyance taxes increased for properties that are valued at more than $4 million. We suspended GET tax exemptions that benefit businesses for a year and a half. We're going to allow counties to increase hotel room taxes up to 3%. And we will also allow the DLNR to charge for state park use. And we will tax tourists or those who rent vehicles. So there are taxes that are basically being imposed upon visitors. And our approach this year was that we did not want to increase taxes on Hawaii residents.
Chad or Colin, you guys want to weigh in on that issue about the taxes? Chad?
I do. If I'm a Hawaii resident that will be paying more to rent a car when I go to a neighbor island. I think that surcharge went from $5 to $8. Is that about right?
Over 7 years.
Well, thank you. That makes me feel a lot better about renting that car. But I do remember that there were a whole lot of bills to raise taxes at the beginning of session. Kevin Dayton, one of our reporters at the legislature, along with Blaze Level, he reported on bills to tax people that make more money, $200,000, $300,000. There were bills to tax sugary drinks, to tax alcohol, to tax tobacco. I think also the inheritance tax was going to go up. The capital gains tax was going to go up. I think every single one of those ended up dying. One bill that did make it through, and maybe the speaker and the president can clarify, but earned income tax credit. I think there was actually a benefit there to extend the EITC a little bit further. That helps folks making less money. But I do want to point out that the concern was we needed a lot of money. We're losing all this revenue. We're not getting that GET and TAT because of tourism going in the tank. And so at the beginning of the session, a lot of bills to raise taxes on a lot of people.
Colin, you want to weigh in on the tax issue?
Let me jump in about the tourism tax, the hotel tax, which I sort of found this bill rather interesting. So, the hotel tax is at 10.25%, and that money, $103 million, from my understanding, was traditionally distributed among the counties. The state will keep that now, but the trade-off is that the counties will be able to impose a new 3% hotel room tax on top of that. So in theory, it could go up to 13.25%. This was criticized by the tourism industry, by a lot of the mayors. And my question here really is a political one, because people often say that the tourism industry has a lot of political pull in Hawaii. I haven't seen that this session at all. In fact, a lot of these expenses are going to be borne by the tourism industry, despite their vociferous protests. I think there's probably going to be a question about whether or not this will hurt our dominant industry when we're trying to recover economically. I happen to think that these are good bills, and I'm glad that the increase in the hotel room tax was passed. But I wonder, just because of the unique thing about this session, which is it was largely closed to the outside, if some of these difficult votes for members were a little bit easier this time, because they weren't facing this onslaught of people in their offices complaining about, for example, this bill, which really I think is a pretty substantial, or could be a substantial tax increase.
Speaker Saiki, on that point, you mentioned the 3% increase in hotel room taxes, but the way it's set up is essentially we're going to take money away from the counties, and then they can raise the 3%. So it's basically a way of raising taxes without getting blamed for raising taxes. I'm wondering, what was the logic of doing it that way as opposed to just raising the tax directly out of the state legislature and then distributing the money? Why give it a county option?
Yeah, so Colin mentioned that $103 million was allocated every year off the top of the state TAT collection, and that was divvied up to the counties. And in law, there's a formula for what percentage goes to each county. And what's happened every year, every single year, because the counties feel that they are experiencing more and more tourist-related costs in their counties, they would come back to the legislature and ask for the $103 million cap to be increased, or they would ask for a different percentage, or they would basically want more in hotel room tax revenue. And so our position this year was that, maybe the counties do need more revenue, and if so, then they should have the authority, they should have the autonomy to impose their own tax within their own county to raise the revenues that they need for these tourist-related expenses. So this is really it's almost like a county home rule issue.
Senator Kochi, you folks were not so much responsible, as I understand it, in the negotiation. This bill was sort of cobbled together at the very last minute there. I don't know that there was ever a specific hearing on that bill, but you folks were much more interested in reforming the HTA part of that. What in that bill is going to change the way tourism operates? There was a lot of talk when we had the pandemic and we all were kind of enjoying having a few tourists around, that we're never going to have tourism the same way we did 2 years ago, and so on. is that where the Senate is trying to do, change the way we manage tourism, or just got the HTA because they were irritating to you?
Well, they're certainly not irritating to me. I think you look at, I brought it with me today, that you got 20,000 hotel jobs that probably aren't coming back right away, even though tourism has picked up. The speaker has said we're still at the highest unemployment rate. But we do need to do things differently. Kauai in April of 2018 with that record-breaking flood and the shutdown of the North Shore finally had the political will to pass a carrying capacity at KA Beach Park, which is at the end of the road in Haiena, and say no more than 900 visitors. There was an article recently about 700 people being turned away because they didn't have a reservation. They were parking all over the place. Emergency vehicles couldn't get through there. They've started that at Wainapanapa Park on Maui. They're collecting almost 90,000 a month now. And so, yeah, we do need to reset it. And it's not the old marketing of going to trade shows or going to travel agencies. There's so many independent, purchasers of the tickets. Influencers have a very big say in where people go and what they choose to do. And what we've seen with the incredible return of tourists much faster than we thought, there's a pent-up market. So we need to reprogram our resources into financial resources into natural resource protection, infrastructure upgrades, so that the experience for both the resident and the visitor is a positive experience. Because they're able to get on social media and really bash a place if we're not doing it right.
Chad, you wanted to throw something in there?
We're talking about House Bill 862, and it's a bit of a smorgasbord. It has a lot of things in there. It's going to also include cutting the HTA's budget, I believe, from 79 million to 60 million. That's an enormous cut. The Hawaii Convention Center, I think it's 15 million down to $11 million. And then going forward, HTA is going to have to find another way to fund its organization, because that formula is no longer going to be in place. I'm fairly certain that this bill is this is on the governor's radar in terms of his potential vetoes. Certainly the tourism industry has been saying, look, there is pent-up demand and we're great to see these tourism coming back, but unless you market the state, unless you recognize that you're competing with other destinations and spending money to bring people here, you can't just take it for granted. Having said that, I recognize the balance that the legislature is trying to achieve here. We don't want 10 million visitors coming to the state again. But when they all disappear, we start to realize maybe it wasn't so bad to have 8 or 9 million coming in.
Colin, you want to say anything about the tourism adjustments or reforms?
Well, look, I agree with what Chad said. This looks like it could very well be vetoed by the governor. And I think one of the governor's points is now HTA has this dedicated stream of funding from the hotel room tax. This allows them to make some longer term decisions. I mean, the longer term destination management, it's called, which is supposed to take a more holistic view of some of these things. And I think the governor's concern is that without that, how do you create these new programs if you have to ask for money every year, which I think is a legitimate concern.
I need to honor our callers here. There's quite a bit I want to get through. Jim and Ia, what are they doing to create jobs? Representative Saiki, is there anything specific that you could point to that will either diversify the economy or create more jobs, perhaps now that we're losing these tourism jobs?
Yeah, we did a number of things. One thing was to create a new program to provide loans for broadband infrastructure. We also approved legislation to require that the state purchase more local produce from our local farmers. We also created a Green Job Youth Corps program to hire people. We will be setting up a program for the installation of more EV charging stations. There are a number of bills that we approved that will lead to more jobs.
Senator Kochi, anything that jumps out at you as job creation or economic development?
Clearly, I agree with the speaker on the area of broadband, we're going to see a lot better opportunity to work from home. I think telemedicine is going to be a growing field where we're going to be able to start delivering medical services at lower cost to residents, and that's going to be important. Hemp, the Farm Bill, hemp was passed in the Farm Bill last year, and we passed the bill last session. And so whether it's, the medicinal applications, construction applications, making rope and, aloha shirts and other material or value-added jobs with that. And then I believe what we're going to see is a lot more value-added coming out of the agricultural areas that the speaker was talking about. And when we see that investment in agriculture, the counties have been passing legislation that you can sell what you're growing on your fields and create retail opportunities so that the farmers can take the middleman out of the picture and keep more money in their pockets. I think that that's going to be an area of substantial growth.
Colin Moore, did you see anything out of this legislature that you think is going to have any significant influence on changing the economy or the way our economy operates?
I wouldn't say significant. I mean, I think most of this is going to come from federal government, where, of course, President Biden has a hugely ambitious package that would provide the sort of things that would create jobs here in Hawaii, child care assistance, pre-K education, a whole slate of proposals that I think really would make the difference. I mean, states don't have a lot of capacity to engage in the big infrastructure projects, social infrastructure projects that really do build jobs.
Chad, do you feel that way too?
Yeah, I feel it's going to come from the federal level, not at the state level. I respect everything that the speaker and the president said about job creation, but I really have never seen the state legislature being in the role of creating jobs. I think what they really wanted to do this time was to make sure that businesses already around can bring people back to work. With the high unemployment that we had, the highest in the country, that was sort of remarkable. There is one bill that has been characterized by supporters that will be good for the economy, that will be good for businesses, and that's House Bill 499. It's also perhaps one of the most controversial bills that got attention late in session. I'll boil it down to this. The Board of Land and Natural Resources would be allowed to extend leases on public lands. I believe it's 40 years beyond a 65-year lease, basically a 100-year lease. The people like Stanford Carr, the developer, the land board itself, or rather the DLNR, PRP, Pacific Resources Partnership, the Prince Kuhilo Plaza on the Big Island, they support it. But the opponents are very worried that this is yet another situation in which the economy is being used as the excuse, jobs, stimulus, helping people out. And what you're probably doing, or at least the argument is that you're giving away public lands.
Let me give either Representative Saiki or Senator Kochi a chance to respond to that. Was this an effort to actually give people who have leases an opportunity to improve and develop those things, or was it just a way of getting rid of regulations that they didn't want? Speaker Saiki?
So this bill has actually been introduced in various forms over the past few years, and it's really the genesis of it. It starts on the Big Island, because there are areas on the Big Island where state land has been leased for the past 60 years or so to businesses, and these businesses are trying to renew their leases because they want to continue to operate their businesses. They want to continue to make investments in their businesses, but they can't do that unless there's some guarantee of a lease extension. And unfortunately, the DLNR has, from my understanding, has slowed down that process and has not been very responsive to their requests for extension. So that's why this year the Big Island delegation, worked on this bill. I want to also emphasize that even if the DLNR does proceed with a lease extension under this legislation, if it becomes law, that extension is still subject to some legal protections. There is still a right to a contested case hearing at the DLNR level. There's still a right to appeal that decision in the courts. So there are still the same safeguards would still apply under these lease extensions.
Okay, let me move on now to some of the bigger, tougher issues. The houseless population, I think for most people, it's become more visible, more disturbing because you're seeing, people with significant mental illness acting out, and large homeless camps still. What was done about homelessness and also about housing? I know Senator Kochi, the legislature, the Senate was always very big on trying to, provide opportunities to develop high-rise housing and so on. But first talk about homelessness, but then also if you want to talk about what you did to help generate affordable housing, I'd appreciate that.
The main thing is in the capital budget, the money was put in, whether it's in the, the DERF fund. See, I'm so used to the acronyms, I can't even.
I appreciate you avoiding those.
What the acronym means, but the rental assistance, housing trust fund, we've made the investments there where we need to develop the units. But as the speaker said, mental health services is critically important. Substance abuse and how we deal with that is important. We are working with the governor, as an example, just in a small area of Kauai. There's a piece of property that the DLNR was in charge of between the County of Kauai's Water Department and Kauai Economic Opportunity, which offers 16 different programs to assist those in need in the community, including having a transitional housing shelter and services. And Mayor Kawakami was able to secure the land, and he built a project similar to Dwayne Cariso's Sand Island project, and they had 30 or 40 units that they recently opened. And we have additional land that's used for base yard by the DLNR. We're trying to find a way to relocate them so we can expand that. And then that facility is right next to the county's park and ride and bus hub. So you've got public transportation on Kauai available. They're adjacent to Kauai Economic Opportunity where they can get services to assist them. And we need to replicate some of these tiny houses, that bring in quality places for the homeless to live.
Representative Saiki, the discussion about DLNR, it gets pretty in the weeds about, and that's specifically about state land. What about broadly speaking? Was there any significant initiative to provide more affordable housing, for purchase or for rent? I mean, that's always talked about, and I don't know that we've seen that much. And when you talk about DERF and LERF and these big funds, right, that's mostly to give, seed money for development, as opposed to reducing the regulations that a lot of developers complain about is what really slows down and tamps down housing.
Right. Well, the legislature is not a developer, so our job is to provide the tools to those who will build affordable housing. And as the president mentioned, we did do that this year. That was actually one of our priority areas for the session. We expanded the low-income housing tax credit, which helps to subsidize the cost of housing development. We provided loans for community home ownership programs. We appropriated $100 million over 2 years to the Department of Hawaiian Homelands so that they can build housing for Native Hawaiian beneficiaries. We deposited $100 million into the Rental Housing Trust Fund and also for rental housing infrastructure. We created a self-help housing program, and we're trying to expand the transit-oriented development, the TOD zones, around the rail stations. If rail is ever built. But there are a number of things that we did in the housing area. And one other thing I wanted to mention, and this is not necessarily about development, but we and Colin mentioned this earlier, but we approved a bill to create a mediation program for renters who are facing eviction at some point. And our estimate is that there are 10,000 households that are at risk of being evicted. And our legislation will provide free mediation services and some legal protection for renters who seek to mediate and try to remain in their homes by creating payment plans or other accommodations with their landlords. And that's a really important program because, as you know, on the national level, there are lawsuits being filed to challenge the moratoriums that are being imposed by the president. And if those lawsuits are successful, then we could face a lot of people here in Hawaii, or a lot of renters who may be forced out of their homes.
Colin Moore, you wanted to say something about that?
Well, Speaker Psyche said exactly what I was going to say. I wanted to give him credit for this mediation program to prevent mass evictions. I mean, this to me is sort of the theme of the legislative session, which was to stop the bleeding. I mean, we need to build more housing, but the worst thing that could happen is mass evictions. And as he mentioned, my colleagues in UHERO did a survey that found that over 11,000 households were behind on their rent. And here in Hawaii, we don't have a lot of corporate landlords. These are mainly mom and pop landlords who themselves can't last for months and months on end without receiving rent. And so this is to help solve that problem, to get the landlords paid as much as possible, and to allow the tenants to be able to stay in their homes.
Chad,
Darryl, can I mention, since we're on that topic of stop the bleeding, there's one other bill that's really important, because this is going to help the safety net. You know, about 20% of the state population relies on loans, predatory loans, because these are the people who do not qualify for regular bank loans. So they go to these outfits and sign up for loans where they're paying 100, 200, 300% interest over a short period of time. So we passed legislation this year, and this predatory lending legislation has come up every year for years and years and years. And finally, we passed it. This will create a new mechanism to regulate predatory loan businesses. It's going to create a licensure requirement. It's going to require installment payments. It's going to cap interest. It's going to cap fees. I think that this is going to help people access capital without being subject to unscrupulous lenders.
I'm going to move on right now because I've gotten 3 questions about cannabis. I could just choose from one or the other. With a plethora of states creating billion-dollar industries related to legalized cannabis, when will Hawaii jump the bandwagon? Why no movement on cannabis legislation? 80% of the Senate voted to legalize adult use cannabis this year. Why didn't it receive a hearing in the House, Health, or Judiciary Committee? Why allow committee chairs the broad discretion to exercise pocket veto? Senator Kochi, what did happen with recreational marijuana was one of the things that your caucus seemed to be somewhat focused on. What happened to it this year?
Well, we supported it, and it didn't move, but I think your assessment is accurate. The Senate, interestingly enough, with all of the by age older members, seems to be a lot farther to the left in their philosophy. And whenever I was asked after last session, what did I think? I always said I thought this was coming, that my caucus overwhelmingly supports it, even though I'm not a big fan of it. And I am very clear that this isn't something I support, but as the president, I understand where my caucus wants to go, and they clearly want to go in that direction. So I expected we'll have a robust conversation again next year.
You know, Speaker Psyche, you know, a lot of people see the cannabis industry, particularly since other states are doing it, as a big potential revenue and job growth kind of situation. Why is it the House didn't feel comfortable with it?
Yeah, so I mean, just to back up a little bit, Darryl, you know, it was the House that over the past few years led the way on expanding the medical marijuana program. Because there was a point in time where for 12 years, licenses were not being issued. The House also helped take the lead a couple of years ago to decriminalize small amounts of marijuana. I think it's 3 grams or maybe 4 or 5 joints with a $100 fine. So the House has taken some bold positions on marijuana over the past few years. When it comes to legalizing recreational marijuana, I think the sentiment within the House is that we should see if our medical marijuana program should first be fully implemented, because it has not been fully implemented. I think there are also concerns that because marijuana is still a controlled substance under the federal law, it's so illegal under the federal law that we cannot, it has to basically be a cash transactions. You cannot use banks, you cannot use transportation services on highways. There are so many built-in restrictions when it comes to marijuana, even if the state legalizes it. So I think there are a number of questions that have to be answered before we just legalize it.
Chad Blair, you wanted to pitch in on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't actually buy what the speaker said. He's right that was the excuse that was given, but in fact, that hasn't stopped the Schedule I ranking for marijuana. That hasn't stopped 17 states and 2 U.S. territories moving forward to legalize marijuana. Just this year alone, I believe it's New York, New Jersey, New Mexico, they're recognizing that this is a revenue source, that people are smoking it anyway. And there were 2 bills that died. One would have increased the amount of decrim from 3 grams to an ounce, and then the other one flat out would have legalized recreational use. We have a poll running tomorrow on Civil Beat that shows, I think, a greater interest, a change a little bit in support for marijuana, recreational marijuana legalization here in the state. Real quickly, House Bill 499, I gotta tell you, the Sierra Club, the Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation, the Office of Hawaiian Affairs have some serious concerns. So I wanted to present that as a balance. They're worried about giving away state lands. There, I got it in. Thanks.
You got it in, okay. Another really huge topic is education this year. And frankly, I wasn't here when this passed, so I didn't really hear the logic of it. But, you know, the question from a caller was $2,200 was appropriated by the legislature for every public school teacher to the tune of $30 billion. Why wasn't that money used for people who have been out of work because of the pandemic? Because teachers obviously were still getting paid. And then even today, HGEA, the representative of the principals and a lot of other school officials are saying, why just give the money to one particular profession? I don't know whether House or Senate took the lead on that, but where did that idea come from, and what was the reason for picking out teachers for that? Speaker Saiki or Senator Kochi, which one of your guys' houses came up with that idea?
Probably a combination. Actually, the legislature was caught, between a rock and a hard place because, a couple of years ago, the DOE administration basically unilaterally began paying salary increases to certain teachers. And, when people found out about that, it basically disrupted the ranks within the teachers. It disrupted that entire system, that some were receiving increases while others were not. And I think that this was, this year, there was an attempt to equalize it for all teachers. We also had to consider the federal rescue funds, which required that the DOE provide the same level, the maintenance of effort services within the schools, the public schools. Okay,
but $30 billion, I mean, so the school budget was $30 billion short and you had to backfill it by giving it to teachers? I don't quite get that. Senator Kochi, what was your thinking about why that was a good idea?
Well, it was negotiated by both committee chairs. And at this point in trying to deal with the rules, and requirements of the ARPA money, and as the speaker and I keep bringing up maintenance of effort, how are we going to be aligned with what has happened? And when you look at how the money was spent in the previous 3 years and money was given to salaries, then we need to commit, the same amount of money that we had been paying in the past. And at this point, that was the decision that would get our budget aligned. And we wanted to be sure that we didn't lose the $1.6 billion.
Colin Moore, they didn't think professors needed the money. So what do you think of that?
Well, actually, there was some CARES Act money that went to faculty for instructional support. So we got some too. And our understanding was that was from the CARES Act from the federal government.
What do you think, though, overall? We're hearing a lot about how in order to get this money from the federal government, we couldn't do this, or we had to do this, we had to do that. It feels like the tail wagging the dog. Like all of a sudden, the federal government has assumed this huge role in really shackling the local authorities. Again, Colin Moore, is that what's going on? Are we really seeing a tremendous increase in the role of the federal government in local decision making?
Well, I mean, look, I mean, a few years ago, we could never imagine this amount of money coming to states. I mean, the federal government made billions of dollars rain from the sky, which is why we haven't had, horrific challenges with workers taking large furloughs. Whenever the federal government gives money, there are always strings attached. That's how they get states to use the money the way they want to. I mean, this created a real problem, I think, for our legislature because they had to run around and try to put the federal money in certain holes and move money over where they couldn't use federal money. But this is sort of the traditional MO for the federal government. They never give money with no strings. And, of course, conservatives are worried that this will lead to more federal control over the states. That's a long-standing issue. But I think at this point, this year, we were in desperate need of that money. So I think strings and all, every state was very happy to accept those funds.
Speaker Saiki, let me ask you. I think that there was when I noticed it the first time, it was when there was a question of whether you could exempt unemployment from taxes, because there's a lot of people got that unemployment and didn't realize or didn't plan to pay the taxes on it. And I think one of your committees, I can't remember which one, said, well, gee, if we give the tax break to the unemployed folks, we're breaking the federal rule. I mean, was it like that this year? Like every time you turned a corner, there was another rule in your way?
Yeah, there were a lot of concerns about making sure that we comply with the federal legislation, because we did not want to jeopardize the receipt of those funds. And that, Darrell, that concept is not a new concept where the federal government imposes restrictions like this. And I'll give you an example. That so recently over the past few years, we had a state law that allowed for free parking for electric vehicles at the airports and in other public parking areas. And the bill came up for renewal a couple of years ago. And then we learned that the federal government had a rule that said that at airports, you cannot have a law that creates revenue diversion. And the free EV parking constituted revenue diversion. The penalty there is a potential loss of federal airport funds. So that's why we could not renew the free EV parking bill 2 years ago. It constituted revenue diversion, and that's the same concept that applies here with the Rescue Act.
It does bring up, though, and that's why I can't park for free at the airport anymore. But Chad, what was that does bring up the issue of education and education reform. Did they make any big changes to the way the school systems work or are funded, or was this basically just patching the holes until, let the system escape without being damaged too badly?
Well, pretty big holes, yeah. I mean, the Department of Education's budget is just about the largest expenditure, maybe DHS sometimes is, but it's an enormous amount of the state budget. And then you have at the same time so many people having to teach from home, have the kids study from home. And I think you've always got to make education a priority. It's hard to remember, but at the early part of this session, Michelle Kadani, the Senate Vice President, Chair of Education, is looking for a lottery to help, fund schools and salaries for teachers and so forth. Pretty bold idea. It died, but we're back to that same situation of how we're going to get revenue for the schools. But yes, a good deal of that federal money went to help, as Colin pointed out, the University of Hawaii and the Department of Education.
Another question that came up in one of the callers was about the Department of Hawaiian Homeland's suggestion that there be a casino. In a recent trip to the mainland, I saw multiple casinos, usually fairly isolated, and then you go another 50 miles down the road and there's another casino, and these are usually Native American run. What was really wrong with that idea? Did you help the Hawaiian Homelands enough this year, or are they going to have to be coming back hat in hand to you folks every year? Senator Kochi, you guys at least gave those bills a hearing.
And I supported the chairs who asked for the opportunity to have the hearing, but I've been very clear when interviewed, I'm not a big supporter of gaming as the way to resolve the problems facing the state. And, as the speaker spoke in detail, we did have large commitment to the Native Hawaiian communities. Senator Keoho Kalole chairs the Hawaiian Caucus. He was a strong advocate and worked with his counterparts in the House to deliver what we think is a good package. So hopefully we can continue to make progress in getting Native Hawaiians into homes without, having to legalize gambling to make it happen.
Okay, and actually, I should give Representative Psyche due. I think the House did hold a hearing on that. And also, just like the Senate, it was killed after just a few moments. We only have about a minute left. I'd like each of you very briefly in one sentence to summarize what was good about this legislative session. Chad, you could start. One sentence.
There was a lot of good measures, reform measures that died, but because it's the biennial session, they're going to carry over to next year. That includes a lot of criminal justice reform, police reform. The no-knock warrants bill died. The chokeholds bill died. The civil assets forfeiture bill died. So many bills. But the good thing is that the lawmakers are considering these ideas, and they are going to carry over to the next session. Hopefully COVID will be out of the way, the budget problems, and we'll be able to address real reform.
Boy, there's a lot of semicolons in that one sentence. Colin Moore, I'll let you have the last word. How would you summarize this legislature in a sentence?
It stopped the bleeding, and a lot of that was due to federal funds, but it still took a lot of hard work to examine our budget and to figure out where to move that money. And without those funds, middle-class folks in Hawaii, particularly public employees, would be in deep trouble right now.
Okay, we are actually out of time. Sorry, Senator Kochi and Representative Psyche, thank you for joining us very much, though. It was a very productive discussion. And I want to thank all of you for joining us, and we thank our guests, Senate President Ron Kochi, Speaker of the House Scott Psyche, Chad Blair from Honolulu Civil Beat, and Colin Moore, Director of the UH Public Policy Center. Next week on Insights, it's been over a year since COVID-19 was declared a pandemic. The virus has taken a toll on the physical well-being of millions, and it's also taken a toll on our mental health. We'll explore what help is available next week. Please join us then. I'm Daryl Huff for Insights on PBS Hawaii. Aloha.